Okay, welcome everybody. I'd like to formally welcome people who are joining us in the chat, in the archive, and live on Facebook or on our website at ELLstudents.com. So excited to have you all here today. The topic is a hot one, which I'm hearing constantly from teachers that I coach, and I experienced it in my own practice as I'm going to be sharing today, which is how do we get students to boost their discourse? And discourse is back and forth conversation between students. How do we get them engaged online? How do we get them into the instruction, feeling valued, feeling part of everything that we're doing, especially in this new environment? So let's dive into this topic. And to frame the work, I'd like to just talk about a framework that I use in my book called The Language Lens in Content Classrooms. And this idea, first of all, that we're all language learners, right? So our students who are multilingual coming in with other language backgrounds, they're English language learners or bilingual students or multilingual students. And that's really important to target those students with specific scaffolds based on their needs and their strengths. However, we also have academic language learners, which are all learners who are learning the academic language of different aspects across the school. I myself, as a first-generation college graduate in my family, definitely academic language learner, in high school, going to college, filling out financial aid, so many things that I learned and continue to learn because we're never fully done learning language. But I'd like to just frame that around like ELLs and ALLs, that high tides lifts all boats to support a language-rich classroom. However, English learners still need their own specific supports based on their specific individual needs. At the same time, we really want to think about how multilingual is the new mainstream. That's what I like to say, because we're working in schools that are more multilingual, more multicultural, more multiracial, more multinational, more multi-abled, more multi-class than ever before. So we really need to change the way that we value diversity and that we really bring in language as an asset, no matter what we teach. Because no matter what we teach, we are all language teachers. So when we're thinking about English language learners, we want to keep in mind the levels of language acquisition. And these are universal. And these are across every single ELD framework that exists, whether you're using ALPA 21 or WIDA, or you're doing the Texas framework or the New York framework, wherever you are in the US or internationally, these are the same levels. So they get labeled a little different in different frameworks, but what's important is the process. So the process grows students' language. And the book, I go way more into depth into these levels. But for our purposes today, I wanted to frame the work around this idea that we're all language learners, and then English language learners have their own process that we need to be aware of and definitely be supporting and scaffolding them. So one way to think about student discourse, as I said, is back and forth. Who's doing the talking? Is it student to teacher only? Or is it student to student? Or is it both? Because that's really important, that it's not just students answering the teacher, but students are talking to each other. So we're going to talk about some tips for that. And this is a very simple place to start, to say, where are we now? If you analyze your own practice, you might realize, I actually have more teacher talk than student talk in my lessons. Today is going to be all teacher talk. I'm the teacher, I'm talking to you, it's 100%. But when I'm doing workshops and coaching, I try to make it at least 50%, if not 75% of student talk. Because students, if they're not using the language, they're not learning the language. So reflecting on your ratio is really important. And when you think about the 4 domains of language, you can do the same across all 4 domains by self-assessing. We have listening and speaking, right? That's oracy or spoken language. And then we have reading and writing, and that's literacy or written language. And students need both input and output. So they need to be getting input by listening and reading. And then they need to be demonstrating their comprehension and also using the language through the output channels of speaking and writing. And again, this is an activity that I do a lot in my coaching, and I'll break it down for you in just a second, but you can really reflect on any given lesson and say, where am I? Oh, is it most of my students are listening 55% of the time, and they only really spoke a couple minutes, say in a half an hour lesson? You can estimate these percentages and really decide, where am I at? And then from there, you can say, which domain do I really need to practice? And typically it's speaking. I mean, I do this every pretty much every day in my career. I've been doing this for a really long time, both as a teacher and now as a coach. And speaking is overwhelmingly the domain that needs the most attention. So what I recommend is really getting down to the activities that you use and seeing where those gaps are so you can really improve your practice to boost that student discourse. So we can really list, like this example is here, are students listening and what are those activities? Right? And then they're reading, what are those activities? So they're speaking, what are those activities and what's the quality of those activities, as well as writing. So we really want to be aware of what our strengths are across the domains so that when we're especially going online, we have some go-to strategies that we can structure. And maybe we can do them every day. We can do them in different ways to help students feel included and engaged, and that the learning is centered around the students. That's really important. One way to do that is make sure that we're bringing in language functions. So you don't even have to be an ESL teacher to use language functions. They're great. They're usually right there in the Common Core or any kind of academic standards that you're using. Here's Describe for an example. So you want to be sure students understand what the language function is. What does describe mean? How can we pictorially represent it through graphic supports? What are some questions and answers that we may use? And again, not just the teacher doing the questioning, but students questioning and answer back and forth so that it is a discourse, because discourse is back and forth. It's not just one word in one sentence answering a question from a teacher. But having students talk to each other. And so we want to really make this language explicit. It shouldn't be a secret. How do we describe? It shouldn't be a mystery. What is the language that we use to discuss, say, characteristics or traits? What are the sentence stems that can help us out there? Otherwise, we're maybe expecting students to do things like turn and talk when they don't know what that is, or actually know why they're doing it, or most importantly, how to do it to boost their learning. Here's an example from one of our partner schools where they really bring these academic language functions to the fore, and they help the students see you're speaking like scholars. This is how people in the workforce discuss problems when they're collaborating together. This is how college students speak. Myself personally, I talked about college before. I didn't really learn how to have adequate student discourse until I went to college. I didn't have things like Socratic seminar and academic conversation groups in my school. And that's the beauty of language-rich classrooms now for all levels, is we're expecting students to do this. It's part of our new language standards. It's part of listening and speaking, reading and writing across the curriculum. It's exciting because all students should have access to this kind of discourse, to have voice by agreeing, disagreeing, by paraphrasing, by elaborating, by describing, on and on with all the many language functions that are rich within our instruction. Here's another list from my academic friend, Jeff Sweers, who's done an extensive amount of research and practitioner work in this area. And he really promotes going beyond turn and talk to real deep conversations. And we rely on his work at Confianza quite a bit to really explain the importance of teaching kids the basic functions here, like paraphrasing, and even using hand signals, like elaborating, supporting ideas with examples, synthesizing, making sure that it isn't, again, a mystery or something that we expect students to do without support. And when I'm coaching and doing this work with teachers, we often model for students, do a fishbowl, have students reflect. What does an academic conversation sound like? What should it look like? How should we be responding to each other? Where should we be held accountable? And how do we make sure that it actually is boosting student engagement and learning? Here's an example from some instruction that I was doing last semester when the coronavirus pandemic hit. And I was working with a group of first and second graders. And I blogged about this spring as well, where I really wanted them to see themselves in the learning, as much as possible. And who doesn't love emojis, especially little girls, and in my group, especially the little girls I was working with. So this was a structure that we put into place, and we had a different activity like this every day as a warm up. But I had here, not just pick a number, but here's the sentence frame down here. The emoji that matches how I'm feeling this morning is number blank, because blank. This is something that you can use with all levels. I use this kind of thing with adults in PD because you may not use emojis, you may not use this exact prompt, but giving people, right, a choice and then giving them the structure to express themselves is going to take you far. Other ways that you can boost discourse is making sure that we're highlighting vocabulary. So giving students the scaffolds like this organizer from a partner school and helping them bring in their first language and making it student friendly with visuals and then sentence, and then having students partner up and talk about these things together and put it in their own words. It shouldn't just be word level that we're hearing or phrase level that we're hearing or that students are writing. We need students to be speaking and writing complete sentences. That should be an expectation. Otherwise, they're never really going to always be expected to speak in complete sentences, especially the students that are building their language production. So by having scaffolded vocabulary activities that, again, are structured and routined, like, for example, you could do this every Tuesday, with a new vocabulary word on your Zoom and have students break into groups and fill it out and discuss, okay, what is our student-friendly definition in our group work? Let's go back and present it. Having students even using TPR, which is a gesture type strategy for demonstrating vocabulary. Things like that can get students moving and get students talking. And then what's really beautiful is if they can say it, they can write it, and vice versa. If they can write it, they can say it. So helping them see that bridge, as I mentioned before, in the output channels of speaking and writing. Finally, as I mentioned before, group work. That's very, very important to consider. How are we breaking students into groups? Why are we putting certain students together? Who are those students? Are they getting equity of voice? Are they getting language models? Are they getting the supports that they need? And then again, the structures to make the groups accountable. This is an image from my book where I talk about if you're the teacher right here and you have all these students, you're essentially ping-ponging around the classroom. It's the same online. If you have a Zoom call with 25 students and you're seeing 25 faces, that's one way of presenting information. But when it's time for students to apply, instead of running around and answering questions to the larger group, put them in strategic groups. And here you are in the middle. And then you can pop into the breakout rooms to check on the students and hold them accountable. So there's many ways to break students into groups. I'm just using Zoom as an example, where we can pre-assign students. We can do random groupings. We can have stations, like I've done that with my students, where we have like the conferring room, the revision room for writer's workshop, the room where students are generating ideas and need to talk to other students, the teacher conference room, for example. You can also have students self-select rooms by renaming their name, which may or may not be a district policy that you can do in your district. But instead of saying like Sarah, for example, that would be my Zoom name, I could rename it as group 1, because group 1 is the group that I want to go in because of what the lesson is demanding. However, I did read this weekend that Zoom is considering a way for students to self-select in a much easier way. So we're looking forward to that news. I know I'll be using that when I work with adults as well. So we always want to be learning. We always want to be improving. We always want to be thinking about discourse and going beyond that turn and talk. So these are some resources that I want to show you very quickly how to find on our website. And you can find these and more, as well as my book, Language Lens for Content Classrooms, which is great as a book study, as well as just kind of an independent study, and it's integrated into all of our courses and coaching. So let me show you how to get to the blog. So if you go to the website at ellstudents.com, you're going to see blog up here at the top. And right here, you're going to see the most current ones that we've published. So here's the strategies for remote content and teaching that I mentioned. However, if you're like, oh, I want to read that one on academic conversations, you can use the search button. And you can just go ahead and search And once it pulls up the options, you're going to see all these examples with academic conversations in there. So you're welcome to look at any of those. The one that goes into that is right here, going beyond turn and talk. So this is that one. But again, feel free to explore, search, look for anything that might be useful for you. We have dozens and dozens of blogs that we're pumping out constantly. We also have the video page where I'm presenting right now, as well as more information about the language lens. And of course, our offerings, as I mentioned before, integrating all the language lens foundational pieces into all of our work. So I hope that was useful for you. And I'm really looking forward to hearing how the school year starts. I know that it's a school year like none other. And we're all, learning and sharing, staying connected on social media. We're hopefully sharing our tips and our tricks and the tech tools that have come to light as we're all working together in this highly disruptive time of education. I think one silver lining of many is promoting more student discourse and accountability and collaboration in really innovative ways, because students really do need to be exposed to technology, and they really do need to be fully centered in the teaching. So I wish all of you the best of luck in trying out the ways that you're planning to engage students in their discourse. And please stay connected to us on social media. Here are my Twitter tags. And have a great school year, everybody. We'll see you soon. Thanks so much.